Nigel Farage is the latest right-wing leader to get the crypto bug. He said this to a crypto conference in Las Vegas, of all places, on Thursday night.
I'm thrilled to be here today, but to announce that rather than just words, we have put together, and this is exclusive for today, the Crypto Assets and Digital Finance Bill.
Months of work, ladies and gentlemen.
We will campaign for this, and we'll put it in place when we win the next general election. And what we're saying is bring crypto and digital assets in from the cold. Have a capital gains rate of 10%. And that means, if taxes are reasonable, people will pay them. We're going to have a Bitcoin digital reserve in the Bank of England. And we are going to pass legislation that says that no bank can close your account because you're trading in legal crypto or digital products.
So Farage's plan for a Bitcoin digital reserve, in the central bank, in the Bank of England, I suppose, is following in the footsteps of his friend Donald Trump, who in March signed an executive order creating a federal Bitcoin reserve. Trump infamously also created his own Trump coin, as did his wife Melania. And Trump Media, which includes Truth Social, has just this week raised $2.5 billion to invest in Bitcoin. Of course, when it comes to Trump, lots of this can be put down to the president using whatever means possible to use his time in the White House to increase his personal wealth. But there is also an ideological angle here, and crypto is a specific obsession of multiple leaders on the populist right. So in February, Argentina's President Milei was engulfed in a crypto scandal after promoting a digital currency that lost investors millions. And this month, he shut down the task force created to investigate that scandal. Meanwhile, in El Salvador, Nayib Bukele is also a big believer in crypto. In 2021, El Salvador became the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender, and they invested millions in Bitcoin reserves. However, the country's recent application for an IMF loan has meant the young right-wing leader has had to scale back on his Bitcoin dream. So what is the connection between right-wing politics and crypto? And how worried should we all be? Well, Rachel O'Dwyer is the author of Tokens, The Future of Money in the Age of the Platform, and she joins me now. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. What is the relationship between right-wing politics and cryptocurrencies? I suppose I used to remember this as being a kind of left libertarian thing. People in the squatting movement are often sort of quite enthusiastic about crypto. Now it seems to be very much right-coded. Why? What do all these right-wingers have in common that means they're all sort of gravitating towards crypto?
Well, it's funny because, my first introduction to crypto, right, was in maybe 2011, 2012, 2013. And as you say, to me, it was quite left-coded, because you understood it as being something that could potentially allow you to redesign money at a moment when a lot of people's trust in the financial system was breaking down. But actually, the history of Bitcoin, if you go back to the kind of early mailing lists from the 90s, where a lot of these technologies were hashed out, is very, it's kind of a free market libertarian or anarcho-capitalist. So, it's about rejecting the state in favor, I suppose, of the perfect exercise of free markets. I think today, though, we're seeing this huge kind of love affair between right-wingers and crypto, because it's less about the technology maybe and what that can do and more about almost ideology and image. So I think for figures like Trump and Farage and Milei and Bukele, that crypto it's kind of being rebranded as sort of anti-establishment politics. So something that was anarchist is kind of being almost brought into the state now and used to signal, freedom from regulation, from taxation, from the central bank. And it lets them, I think it's also interesting, maybe it lets these sorts of right-wing leaders perform power without appearing authoritarian, even as they consolidate control. So it's not really about decentralization in the way maybe we would have associated with kind of left-wing projects. It's about using crypto to signal sovereignty and rebellion and to attract attention. So kind of vibes as opposed to like viable economic policy.
And I suppose, could you, it's a question that takes us a few steps back, but I suppose in a way sort of explain why crypto matters. Because, there are lots of technologies which get a lot of buzz. I'm very much sort of taken in by the buzz around AI. We're going to talk about it later today as well. Not because I think it's going to necessarily bring us a brilliant future, but I think it clearly is going to, well, I think sort of revolutionize society for better or worse. Bitcoin to me has always seemed like a sort of obsession of a small number of people who are getting quite rich from it, basically because other people are piling in their money. It looks like a bit of a Ponzi scheme, but it doesn't seem to be popping. Is there, should I care more about crypto than I currently do? Should I be paying more attention to this movement than I have been up to now?
No, I guess I don't. I mean, maybe we should be paying attention to it because even things that are silly and ideological, like Trump, Trump was the meme president, can have a real, can have an impact. But I think at the moment, in theory, crypto can serve various purposes, but in practice, I think it's mostly symbolic. So it's sort of part of this sort of new, I guess, speculative kind of state in that sense. I mean, there have been progressive experiments with crypto, local currencies, time banks, various different kind of experiments with using like the underlying technologies like smart contracts to give citizens better control of their data. There was an interesting sort of pilot project in Barcelona a few years ago that was sort of trying to see, what are the applications of these that might be actually useful. But it seems like, for those sort of current right-wing people, it's mostly, I think, about symbolism and attention as opposed to actually materially transforming anything. So there is a left-aligned crypto history. There's, these different cooperative models, but it rarely scales or gets state support. But the state loves crypto when it helps sort of market itself as modern or rebellious.
And I suppose the Trump situation, which I know more about than Milei or Bukele, and I suppose with Nigel Farage, we're still quite early in this story. But the Trump situation seems to be largely that he's using crypto as a slush fund. So he sort of has this Trump coin, and if you want to donate money to Trump, but in a way which is very difficult to trace, you could just buy a bunch of Trump coins, which pushes up its price. That will increase the value in Donald Trump's pockets, because I suppose he created these Trump coins out of thin air. And so lots of people are just saying this is a way that you can pay Donald Trump bungs without anyone noticing. Also, I suppose there is a big conflict of interest because Donald Trump is buying into Bitcoin whilst making decisions which will inflate the price of Bitcoin, because obviously the Federal Reserve is creating a Bitcoin reserve. That's going to increase the demand for Bitcoin. Increasing the demand for Bitcoin raises the price. So you can see this as sort of Donald Trump just trying to get personally rich. And Donald Trump is ideological about some things, tariffs, borders, but the thing that seems to drive him more than anything is his own ego and his own personal enrichment. So you can almost see, this is as beyond politics. It's just a venal politician who wants to get rich. Is there a similar situation sort of in El Salvador, Argentina, Farage? Can we sort of, I suppose, extrapolate from the Trump situation onto all these other right-wing leaders who've sort of fully bought into the crypto hype?
I mean, I think the Trump situation it's so singular in that sense, and that it's this like crazy economic moment where by making these, not just making pro-crypto policies, but, actually issuing his own coin, that the president actually stands to economically benefit, as you said, from the sort of policies that are being put in place. So there is, I suppose, that sort of monetary aspect definitely with Trump. But I think, it's not just a financial scam. It's also like a political branding strategy. Crypto can sort of signal, I suppose, to investors, to voters, to tech bros that, we're the party of freedom, of risk, of sovereignty in some weird way, even though it's, it's sort of sovereignty coming from the state, anarchism coming from within the state. So I think for a lot of these politicians, it's not just about lining their pockets, it's about dominating the news cycle, looking like a founder, almost turning national identity into a brand. Like we're almost seeing these states sort of operate more, in the line with Silicon Valley venture capital than with what we might have understood as like the state.
And I suppose, there's lots of things to worry about at the moment. So sometimes we should ration, our concern. And I suppose in a way, what I'm hearing from you is that, Farage, Trump, Bukele, Milei, these right-wingers all piling into Bitcoin isn't necessarily this sort of incredibly thought out conspiracy that's going to screw us all. It's potentially a sideshow. Some of them want to get rich. Some of them are doing it as a branding exercise. Should we be fearful of these right wingers piling into Bitcoin? Is there any sort of mechanism by which this deeply affects all of us, or can we treat this as a concerning sideshow?
I mean, I think it's concerning because that sort of ideology obviously plays out in, maybe it doesn't necessarily play out in the kind of pro-crypto policy necessarily, but, it sort of has echoes then in terms of also how the state sees itself as doing governance. So, something like if we go back to the States, Trump and, Musk and Dogecoin are sort of the other side of that. So I think, I was talking there about the idea of the state sort of recasting sovereignty in speculative terms, so acting like a hedge fund almost. But there's also a sense that there's this sort of imaginary of what governance looks like that goes along with that, which is very much about removing all the messiness of human politics and kind of the lag of bureaucracy in favor of some kind of vision of, algorithmic, like perfect sort of control. So like a kind of democracy without people nearly. And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but I feel like there are these sorts of, concerning and material effects that go alongside what we can dismiss as being like vibes and memes. It feels like a lot of politics now is a vibe, and the vibe has a sort of a material underbelly.